And welcome to the official kickoff of the Campaign Optimization Series. My name is Andrew Gaffney. I'm Editorial Director with Demand Gen Report. Really excited you could join us for the series, and we've got a great session to officially kick things off. ABM has been one of the hottest topic areas now for probably about 3 years. I'll share some data to this point, but we do our Demand Gen benchmark survey every year, and for the past 2 years, ABM has come up as the top priority initiative for B2B marketers. We've got a great session here today. We did a similar session at our B2B Marketing Exchange conference a few months ago on a similar topic, and it was standing room only. Got great feedback, so we're really excited to present something similar today to you on ABM and modern B2B advertising, reaching the buying committee at your target accounts. The Campaign Optimization Series is being brought to you by Demand Gen Report, and if you're not already a subscriber, I encourage you to check it out and join us online, taking advantage of some of our great content. We want to make the series as interactive as possible. We encourage you to share any comments or questions you might have regarding the content we're sharing today or throughout the week. We ask that you would include the hashtag CO Series. That'll stand for Campaign Optimization Series. We'll be monitoring that. We can reply or tack on to any comments you have. You'll also see the handle for some of our partners for this series if you want to include those in anything you have. Throughout the week during the Campaign Optimization Series, we're going to have a prize pack, so active participants are going to have chances to win some cool prizes, including Starbucks gift cards, and also chances to win free registration to our B2B Marketing Exchange event. So definitely take a look out for that. Also, one grand prize winner will have a chance to win Apple AirPods. So again, the more engaged you are, the more sessions you sign up for and attend, more points towards winning. So stay active and take advantage of some of the great content we have. Again, we're using the On24 platform. A couple of quick housekeeping items there. You can monitor social media right within On24, so keep an eye there. Also, we'd encourage you to submit questions. The presentation will be about 30 minutes, and then we're going to take 10 to 15 minutes of questions. Please type in your questions as they come to mind in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to as many as we can. At the end, if we don't get to all your questions, I'll ask our speaker to follow up with you directly. And there's also some great resources related to today's topic in the Resource Center. I encourage you to take advantage of those as well. Some of the frequently asked questions we get, today's session is being recorded, so as a registrant, you'll get a link to go back and review the content. Also share it with your team so that they can view it on demand. To be joined by Nani Schaefer. Nani is the Director of Product Marketing with Demandbase. I've had the opportunity and good fortune to work with Nani over the years. Nani brings more than a decade of experience in marketing operation, demand generation, and product marketing in the tech industry. As Director of Product Marketing at Demandbase, she is responsible for the development of messaging, sales enablement, and competitive differentiation for the Demandbase ABM platform. Previously, she ran marketing operations and was responsible for the measurement and optimization of strategies and processes. So she is a practitioner and knows how to use their own product as well as a lot of the others that you folks on today's webinar are using, including Demandbase's own approach to account-based marketing. So, Nani, really glad you could join us today. Excited to have this conversation with you. Thanks for joining me.
Really glad to be here.
So before, you got a lot of great content to walk through, and excited to join you to walk through some of it. Just to set the stage, talked about this at the outset, but when we do our Demand Gen benchmark studies, the top priorities for 2019 really align well with today's topic, so it's a great kickoff to the session. You can see here the top four. I'll read through them quickly, but number one was improving the ability to measure and analyze measuring marketing's impact, and there's some really great content thought leadership that Nani's going to share around measurement, specifically around ABM. Improving sales and marketing alignment continues to be a top priority, and I think that's going to align really well with some of the suggestions that Nani will share and examples that she'll share. Engaging the right stakeholders is really key within target accounts. There's some great examples of that about how you can advertise to the buying committee, so I think we got some great content around that. And then we're just seeing a general shift ongoing around focusing on really reaching the right folks as opposed to driving volume of leads, so that's definitely very well aligned with what we'll be covering today. Just cover it quickly, but before we kick off, ABM remains the top priority. More than 46% cited account-based marketing as their top initiative for 2019. So if you're among that crowd, you're in the right place, and we got some great insights about how you can do it more effectively. So just wanted to set that up as a prelude, and with that, let me turn it over to you officially now to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. As I mentioned, really excited to be here with everyone today. We're gonna start out today by talking about why it is that we've all been hearing so much about ABM and kind of what it means and what it solves. And then we're going to take spend the bulk of the time on an in-depth look at one piece of an ABM strategy, which would be account targeting, in part because it's a great first step in an end-to-end ABM strategy, but also because there's some really exciting developments that are happening in the field that are really revolutionizing the space. And then we're going to wrap up with my favorite piece, always personally, around measurement and what that means both for the advertising strategy that we just had talked about, but also your kind of broader ABM strategy. So as marketers, we've all got different goals and objectives specific to our businesses, and we might be focused on growing top-line revenue, or you might be focused on the bottom line and increasing margin. You might be responsible for building out a new vertical for new products and services, or kind of nurturing your overall brand and generating greater awareness, and really always looking for ways to increase your marketing efficiencies. And regardless of what specific initiatives you are working on, we're all really trying to, at the end of the day, grow our business. And the question, though, is how are we going to do it? How are we going to get that incremental growth that we're all looking for? And when we think about some of the challenges that we face as marketers, really the biggest challenge we face is that traditional demand gen is fundamentally broken, right? And it's led to all these different challenges and inefficiencies. And the first is that it's hard to generate high-quality leads. Now, generating leads in general is a little bit easier, but generating leads that sales finds value in is more difficult. And the majority of B2B marketers actually cite this as their number one problem, right? And we really do continue to throw money at the top of the funnel to try and deliver the leads that sales wants. The second challenge that we see is that there's this power shift from companies to buyers, and buying behaviors are really starting to change, especially much over the last couple of years, and prospects don't want to talk to a salesperson anymore. They want to conduct their own research on their own. They want to stay anonymous through really the majority of the buying cycle, and get their information from different channels and different sources. And so by the time they raise a hand and they ask specifically to talk to a salesperson, they've really kind of made up their mind. And at this point, they're talking much more just about price. So how then do we shift our strategy to kind of address those challenges? Obviously, in order to generate those high-quality leads and acknowledge this new buying cycle where the power is in the hands of the buyer, we as marketers have to be especially and hyper-focused on those accounts that are most likely to buy from us. So this is kind of a very basic overview of what it means to employ an ABM strategy here. But, first step, identify the accounts that are the most important to your business, right? Second step, market to them. And then the third is to measure that, right, and optimize your program and make sure you've got the kind of account-level data and insights to do this. So over the past couple of years, B2B marketers have really realized that ABM is more than just a flashy trend, and for many this has become a truly critical and organization-wide initiative, but there are still remarkably many questions about what it means to implement ABM across the entire funnel. And we kind of have to cut ourselves a break because a lot of the educational material and technology, frankly, that's out there is typically emphasizing one area of the problem, right? But to really drive results from ABM, you have to understand what it means to do full funnel ABM. So these are all kind of variations on a theme, but I want you to understand before we dive in what these key pillars are and how they're going to impact your activities across the funnel. So the first step to implementing account-based marketing is to build your target account list, right? Identify the companies with the most potential to your business, and that may be customers, it could be prospects, it could be partners, or a mix of all three of those. And obviously the attributes of those accounts are going to vary based on what's important to your particular business. So you really need the ability to segment those audiences for specific campaigns and objectives, and figure out who you should be focusing on, both kind of in the near term and the long term. There's also then a more targeted approach when it comes to attracting your target accounts, right? B2B marketers have to put aside really most of what they've learned so far, because now it's possible to leverage technology, and this is what we'll go into a little bit more deeply in a second, to run targeted display advertising campaigns to specific accounts that are on the list, right? And also, coming with that is the ability to move beyond those traditional metrics associated with attraction, like impressions and click-through rates, and start to measure instead, results that are related to sales activity. Now, once they're engaging with your content and with your website, now it's important to deliver a personalized and a relevant experience. So you want to be able to identify both known and unknown visitors, right? And personalize your messaging and what you're presenting, and leveraging AI really to understand what's relevant to these individuals at these accounts and move them through the buyer's journey. Of course, advertising and website content can help drive the right traffic and the right interactions, but an ABM strategy has to do more than that, right, when it comes to actually closing deals. And marketers can now support sales with data that really covers the entire funnel. When you've got a prospect that's visiting your website and they land on a product page, say, or you've got a target account that's got lots of individual buyers that are showing high levels of intent, you want to be able to deliver those insights to your sales organization to spark conversations that are kind of based on those insights that you've provided. And then, of course, finally, measurement, right? And this is really, I put it last, but it's truly the cornerstone of ABM. You have to be able to capture a baseline and measure your activity along the way, and obviously measure the impact on your business goals. And it's measurement that's going to help build the strategy across all those other stages of the funnel, whether that's attracting and driving awareness to the right accounts, or optimizing your website and your content, your nurture strategies to focus on those same accounts. And then, of course, increasing and accelerating those conversions.
So, Nani, I just wanted to chime back in. I think just back to the slide you had covered previously, what the reason we're seeing it being so critical to be able to do this across the funnel and across media channels and then be able to track it is just the changing, buyer behavior that you mentioned. So we've been doing the B2B buyer behavior study now for a couple of years, and we've definitely seen that shift away, less and more anonymous behavior, et cetera. But, the other thing is that there's consistently more complexity and more buying team members involved. So, this is the most recent study we did. More than half said that the number of buying team members had increased significantly. So the ability to understand that and be able to engage with different influencers, decision makers, is really critical to win deals. And then the other nuance that I think is really aligned with your last point was just that 84% of buyers said that they either accelerated or put purchase decisions on hold based on changing business needs. So I think the reality that, we go into this mindset with, B2B deals take a long time. They take 6 to 12 months, so it sort of dictates that it's always going to be slow and deliberate, and you can sort of predict how it's going to go. It's not true. I mean, they are more agile in some cases. It might go really quick, and they might bring in more team members. So being in front of them in consistent, relevant ways, I think is just becoming more critical. So I just wanted to chime in with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and ties into kind of the next topic especially well, in that when you think about, I love that you use the word relevant, right, and making sure that we have a responsibility and now the capability as marketers to understand how to make our messaging relevant to individual buyers within, a target account in a way that's going to make their buying experience much more positive and ultimately end with a better outcome. And so the ability to act on those insights and that kind of, relevant material is incredibly important. So we've gotten kind of a handle, right, on the full funnel ABM approach at this point, but now I do want to take a deeper look at that second step that we talked about, which is how to attract the right accounts. Now, advertising, obviously not a new channel, certainly, and even digital advertising, not a new channel, but we're seeing a lot of transformation in the space right now. I want to just take a quick look back at what we've seen in terms of the progression of B2B advertising in the past few decades. And really this started back in the 1990s with direct buyers, with advertisers that were buying direct from publishers. So imagine, I want my ad on New York Times because I'm making some assumptions about the types of individuals that are likely to be on the New York Times or certain areas of that site, and I want to make sure to get my message in front of them. So that's kind of how this all started, right? That every ad I put up involved a direct involvement with a publisher. And then from there in the 2000s, we started to see ad networks emerge, right? And now you've got the ability as an advertiser or potentially as an agency to have a single transaction with one vendor, but to be able to buy impressions across now an aggregated pool of sites. So I don't have to do them one by one, but I can more efficiently advertise across multiple sites and again kind of pool them together based on the assumptions I'm making about who it is that I'm trying to reach. And then more recently, right, we have programmatic advertising that kind of really burst onto the scene. This was a big step forward. And now, instead of worrying really, for the most part at all, about where the advertisement was actually placed, I'm focused entirely on who that individual is, right, what their job title is, what their seniority is, and based on the profiles that I've built out, I want to track that individual, whether they're known or unknown, across the web wherever they are. Now you'll notice though that I didn't call this programmatic advertising, I called this quote unquote fuzzy identity. So why do I call it that? With programmatic, what you've essentially got is this ecosystem of data management platforms and data providers, and they're telling B2B advertisers that now you can get super addressable, super granular with your audiences. And so they would publish these targeting segments that look somewhat like these, where they're essentially attaching attributes to anonymous user cookies, right? So things like company size or industry, job title, department, seniority, right? And this on the left might look like kind of a nice menu of all the different options that I as a marketer have, and I would want to pick out, one of these to advertise to. But as it turns out, every single one of these attributes is actually attached to the same cookie, right? And more importantly, potentially, they're almost all wrong, right? So my individual cookie has been identified as being at a company that's 10 to 50 employees and simultaneously 50 to 100 employees and simultaneously more than 5,000 employees, somehow none of which are correct, right? And that becomes kind of scary that these cookies that are being put into these different segments are, for the most part, wildly inaccurate. So it's really no surprise, right, that when Dun & Bradstreet polled demand gen professionals just a couple of years ago, right, only 10% felt like they felt like their paid advertising was effective, their paid online advertising was effective, right? And there's this kind of quiet crisis of confidence where advertisers really are starting to have to admit that they don't actually know what they're getting when they buy one of these persona segments, right? But they don't really have another option. And yet, we still collectively have this fixation on wanting to find specific job titles, on this dream that potentially it's possible, and if only I could get to these exact job titles, I would be where I need to be, right? Couple of different problems with that, though. Even imagining that I could get to a 100% accurate segment of all of the specific job titles that I was searching for, how do I actually know which job titles I should be going after? So in Demandbase, actually, we looked at who we had sold to just in the past year and the unique titles that we sold to, again, just in a year, and we've got more than 500 unique job titles, right? And then you start looking out on the web and you see things, right, like a chief heart officer as a title, which as far as I know, this is not a doctor or someone who might actually be like a chief heart something, right? We've got content ninjas and senior front-end gurus, right? Titles that there may be only one of in the world, and that didn't exist all that long ago, right? So how is it that I can even pick out the right job titles to target, even if I could assume that they were going to be accurate? Beyond that, when you think about, okay, an enterprise organization might have dozens of different business units and hundreds of people with effectively the same title, and not all of them are going to be interested or need my products and services at the same time, right? So how do I know which ones are the ones that are in market for my solutions? Now, all of this is painting, to be honest, sort of a sad picture where this is all very hard, if not impossible, and we can't get at the right job titles, and even if we could, we don't know which job titles we want to go after. But there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel here. And what I'd like to do is to have you think, instead of seeking in programmatic advertising to find more accurate identity signals, what if we took another look at having different ways of thinking about contextual signals instead? What do I mean by this? When we think about traditional contextual advertising, right, that is about, the site that the user's on in the moment the advertising is served. But if we only have that one piece of information, right, we don't know all that much. So what if instead we start to gather information about all the articles that any individual is reading in aggregate? So now, instead of taking at face value the fact that, this person stumbled upon, let's say, a supply chain management article, we can see that she's read multiple articles about that topic over the course of several days. And so now, by observing that broader behavioral history of that individual and their content consumption around the web, now we can start to see patterns that are actually useful. So we've got access to this intent data at massive scale, but how do we actually make use of that in an automated way? This is where artificial intelligence technology and importantly, natural language processing on top of that gives us a broader view, right? And we can start to find patterns and trends at a really granular level. And when I say we, I'm talking about the AI, not individuals, right? Because we're talking at the scale of millions and billions, and even over the course of a year, trillions of interactions. And so having AI and that natural language processing sit on top of that enables us to find those more organized sets of keywords that can then be attached to individuals and then aggregated at the account level, and then really enabling us to intelligently target accounts and individuals. So what this AI is doing really is it's correlating these topics and keywords and interests to our customer buyer profiles at this incredible scale. And then that can be trended for an individual or for an account or for a whole audience segment or group of accounts that I'm trying to target. And that's the type of thing that takes really massive computational undertaking, right, that just wasn't possible even a few years ago. So now we're really viewing the world in quite a different way. Instead of saying, I want to find all of these job titles out there, we're starting, right, with our total addressable market. Who is it that can buy from us? In B2C, it's a little bit different. If you get individuals outside of your core target, they're less likely to buy from you. In B2B, often, if you're reaching individuals at accounts that are outside of your TAM, they can't buy from you. You're truly, truly throwing that money away, right? So starting with that total addressable market of a finite number of accounts, and then honing in on, right, who do I want to target, right? Who do I have the resources now to have as my broad target account list that are more likely to buy than others? And then even from within those, I think that's kind of the who. The when becomes important, and that's where intent comes into play. How does intent help me understand who's in market for my solutions today? And then finally, and importantly, we can't forget that while the account, of course, is central, we're still talking to individual buyers and influencers, right? And using intent in order to identify those that are in market. So this is really kind of a roundabout way of saying that our collective fixation that we've had on job titles always was a proxy, right? And it was a proxy for who's a part of the buying process. But we don't actually need that proxy anymore because AI is allowing us to answer that question more directly by observing who is it within the account who's actively researching my category or the problems that I can solve or the available solutions that I've got, right? And that's a very, very critical distinction, that going after the job title was a flawed approach to begin with, and that we should be thinking more about the behaviors and indicators of a buyer that are much more sophisticated and relevant and real, things like their research behavior on my site, off my site, than would be simple job title. Now, when we think about intent-based advertising methodology that we just walked through, what it really gets at is this combination of both scale and precision. So with traditional programmatic advertising, you can certainly drive clicks, right? But how many of those are coming from your target accounts? And that becomes a problem. You're getting a lot of clicks, but a lot of them are wasted. They can't buy from you. On the other end of the spectrum, with paid search, so things like LinkedIn, right? You certainly can be very good at being very accurate at targeting only those accounts that are valuable to you, but you don't have the kind of scale that you would be able to get by getting off the individual sites, right? By making sure you're getting impressions in other places than those paid social environments. So with intent-based advertising, you want to meet somewhere in the middle, right, where you've got the scale that's driven by expanding beyond just the social networks, but you've got precision of being able to target just your target accounts and the individuals within those accounts that are showing signs of intent. So just to kind of wrap up here on this intent-based targeting and why it's so powerful, and why it's so important to think of behavioral intent signals instead of segments that are really just kind of purporting to identify a job function or title or department. First, importantly, it's more scalable, right? So it's better at penetrating the full buying committee. On the ad exchanges, you've got personally identifiable information that's forbidden for privacy reasons. So reliable identity signals like job title are really only going to be available for a very small minority of individuals. Behavioral intent signals, though, are visible from basically every employee at your target accounts, assuming they have a computer, which they almost always do, right? Second, you can be more relevant, and this is the point that we talked about at the very beginning here, right? That behavioral buyer targeting is producing these very relevant audiences because it's focusing on those individuals who are showing signs of intent specifically for your offering. So you don't worry as much about those enterprise situations where you've got all the different BUs and people of a similar title that aren't interested in what you have to buy. You're not worried about that anymore. And then lastly, and very importantly, what this enables is brand safety. And we haven't touched on this specifically until now, but think about the idea that previously you would have had to kind of follow around this tiny and shrinking pool of cookies that you could have a job title for, whether it was accurate or not. That meant that you sort of had to follow them to all the nooks and crannies of the web. Now, when you've got the scale coming from, following those that are showing behavioral intent signals that don't necessarily have to be identified with PII, now you've got the ability to be more selective about where you want your inventory to be seen.
That's great. Thanks, Donnie. I just want to jump back in again for a second. I know the last part you were going to cover is around measurement, so I did want to share a couple of the data points from, this is again back to our demand gen benchmark study, but measurement and attribution are a huge priority. I know on all the readers that I talk to. In fact, 47% said that they're actively already trying to track attribution and influence, and 42% said they're planning to try to do it within the next month. So definitely a goal, and I'll be interested to hear some of the recommendations and examples that you have about how to do that, especially on an account basis where more people are heading. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I think you're going to be touching on relationship with data and measurement, how they tie together. So one of the challenges was, 42%, only 42% said that they feel like they really still have good coverage currently in their accounts, and I think that's another reason why that intent play is also so interesting and valuable. And 28% said they're really trying to prioritize getting deeper into accounts and having deeper connections to specific contacts within it. So I just wanted to add that before you moved on to the next segment.
Yeah, I think those are really valid and important points to bring up, and I do find that it's really interesting that we're seeing kind of this simultaneous acknowledgement that ABM is working, right, and people will cite all sorts of fun stats about how well it's helping them, and yet in the same breath saying how hard it is to actually measure, and importantly to get the data right, because we've technically got access to this incredible wealth of data that we didn't have until recently, but tying it all together and bringing all these systems together and making all these tools work together is kind of the next level. So, of course, none of all of this matters of what we've just done and what we've just talked about when it came to our advertising strategy and different methodologies if it isn't ultimately helping you get at your business objectives that we talked about, right? So how do you think about measurement in this new world of intent-based advertising? And we're going to start there, but then we'll also talk more broadly about measurement across really all of your channels, since obviously, your account-based programs are going to involve more channels than just the one. So what are you actually measuring? Now, when we talk about visibility as a challenge, here's what we kind of mean by that. So while all platforms are going to tell you, or most platforms are going to tell you things like how many impressions you've delivered and, other metrics like click-through rate and cost per lead, as account-based marketers, we also need to know how well is the campaign performing, how well is it driving engagement from our target buying committees, and is it generating pipeline opportunities or a lift in close rates? Those important elements as well that just frankly are not exposed by most platforms. The other thing that's important to know is that what's typically hidden but incredibly critical for us to understand is getting deeper into the resolution, into the delivery and the performance at the account level as well. So thinking not just about a broad segment of accounts that I might want to target, but making sure that my entire budget isn't being eaten up by one large, huge enterprise company, and that I'm able to kind of optimize my spend across all the different accounts that I want to get in front of. So those two kind of dimensions become really critical as you think about measuring your account-based advertising in particular. Now, you might kind of wonder why we're so focused on engagement and not satisfied with this idea of clicks, which fundamentally, for the most part, you may click before you engage. But what we've actually found as we studied, hundreds of and thousands of campaigns with our customers is that it's actually not necessarily clicks or even leads that tell us whether we're moving the needle that get correlated to business outcomes, but site engagement is, right? So accounts that are engaged on the website are actually 67% more likely to move into an opportunity, and they've actually got higher deal sizes as well. So as with all metrics, right, we don't necessarily want to get caught up with what's easy, but really forcing ourselves to tie things to real business outcomes. Now, as I mentioned, we don't want to limit this measurement discussion just to advertising. And so when I take a step back, and I actually spend a lot of time personally, especially with my marketing ops background, thinking about broader measurement strategies in B2B. And as we think through what it is that our customers are trying to solve and what B2B marketers are trying to solve when it comes to measuring their performance, there's really kind of four primary areas that they think about, right? And the first is, I need to know where I stand today. It sounds really basic, but essentially what I'm saying is that if you've decided that you're committed in going after a given group of accounts, a group of target accounts, where are they in the funnel today, right? Are they on your website? Are they engaging heavily with your content there? Are they converting on your website there? Are they converting, more importantly, potentially into sales opportunities and ultimately into customers, right? Where are they in that kind of hierarchy? And while it might sound kind of easy, right, especially because you've got a finite denominator here. You're talking about your group of 500 accounts or 2,000 accounts. The reality is that getting at each of those different segments actually is pulling in data from different systems, right? You've got your CRM system involved in the sort of bottom of the funnel. You've got your web analytics in the top of the funnel. You've got marketing automation for other methods of engagement. So there's lots of data that would all be input in order to just figure out where am I today, right? The second question we get is as soon as we've answered the first one, right, and I've now figured out what percentage of each of my accounts are in each of these different stages, then the question becomes, well, is that good? Is that bad? Do I need to be concerned? How does that compare to anything? So the second question really is around how do I put that in context? And my advice here is that the tendency when you're putting those numbers in context is to flee to benchmarks, right? To say, okay, well, I should see about half of my accounts on my website, half of my target accounts on my website, because that's what somebody told me was industry-wide, quote-unquote normal. Those numbers are going to change incredibly between different businesses and even within different initiatives within your own company, right? So rather than looking at benchmarks, we talk about, comparison or control groups, right? Compare it to the same audience a year ago, or compare it to, an audience that isn't getting this extra special treatment or resources that you're throwing at your target accounts, right? To be able to understand what kind of incremental impact you're seeing. And I'll show you what that might look like in just a second. Third is, okay, I've got, the state of the universe. I understand I'm doing fairly well. Now I want to kind of double click. What else can I see? What kind of trends can I look at? Are these, how is my funnel velocity doing? Are these accounts moving from one stage to the other at the rate that I would hope that they are? How are things trending? That becomes critical as well. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is like, what the heck do I do with this information, right? I know where these accounts are, but how do I drive them to where I need them to be? And how do I engage better with them, right? What is it that I should be doing to support these accounts in their buying journey? So all of this kind of comes together to help, design a system of metrics and KPIs that really is about insights that we want to deliver to both practitioners and also decision makers to help them understand how to optimize and to prioritize and make decisions. Think about this in the previous slide I had just talked about kind of organizing accounts into the different phases that they are in the buying cycle. So on the right here, what you're seeing is just kind of a very simple way of thinking through this. In the light blue, that kind of top bar, imagine that as being your full set of accounts that you're targeting. So let's just say you've got 1,000 accounts that are in this particular target account list. You can obviously see all of them, and then you can identify how many of them are on my website, how many are engaging there heavily, how many are converting, moving into opportunity, and close one, right? So I've got all these, and again, all flowing from the same denominator of those original 1,000 accounts. Importantly, what you're also seeing on here in the dark blue is that control group, right? So I have 1,000 different accounts that are maybe similar firmographically that I might expect to be able to market to if I had wanted to pour the investment into them, but I haven't, right? My control group against which I'm going to measure the incremental impact of my ABM strategy, right? And what you're seeing there, again, is all starting with the same 1,000, but fewer of them are visiting my website, and a smaller percentage are engaging there and converting and becoming customers. So what this now enables me to do is to have a much more intelligent conversation about the actual difference that my investment is making, because you'll notice there are dark blue accounts that are converting, right? There are still sort of inbound or quote unquote like natural things that happen with these accounts, or maybe your sales reps, right, are driving these as well, that lead these accounts to still engage with you in a buying cycle. But look how much of a difference your marketing is making, right? So that enables that type of conversation, and it also helps you identify those gaps in the funnel to figure out what to do next, right? It could be that your light blue is lower than you'd want it to be on visiting your website, and you want to think about how you generate awareness within your target accounts to drive them to your site. That same comparison model and kind of control group theory or structure works really well across a number of different use cases, right? You can think about that being really helpful, like we talked about, with understanding the impact of account-based marketing, but also, comparing any audiences, right? So you might be interested in going into a different vertical or a different region or different company sizes, right? You can compare the performances of those different segments to understand how they're moving through the funnel. You could also use it to do things like comparing vendors, right? Do a quick A/B test where you put 500 accounts into one program and 500 into another and compare the outcome over time. That type of a methodology becomes really helpful. Together, right? How do we think about this, just to kind of tie a bow on it, as a true, supporting mechanism for an end-to-end ABM experience? And the first thing, right, and critical part of this is to identify those high opportunity accounts, to understand your denominator of the number of accounts that you're going to be going after. And then, as we talked about, to plan and to launch account-based advertising against those accounts, and to be able to get at them with intent signals, right, to be able to deliver those tailored messages on premium brand safe sites that we talked about, that you can now afford to be selective about because you're following behavioral signals and not identity signals. And optimizing your budget, right, across both the accounts, right, which accounts should I be going after, but also getting into which individual buyers, who am I willing to bid more on based on their past behavior. Of course, maintaining the same kind of a message on your website, so that as folks have been exposed to your advertising, are now coming to your website, you want to make sure they're getting the same message there, delivering insights to your sales team so they're a part of this process as well, and then, of course, measuring throughout the entire funnel. So all of this is kind of coming together to drive a critical part of your strategy that we talked about, which is driving that awareness with this intent-based advertising methodology, but really tying it into all of the rest of that buyer's cycle. With that, I will pass it back over to Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Nani. Those are really great insights and examples, use cases, so appreciate all of that. Reminder to our audience to type in any questions that you have. We're going to have a bunch good ones coming in for Nani. We'll spend about 10 minutes going through those, so make sure to type yours in. So, Nani, we have a couple of good questions. Phil was asking if, in order to effectively utilize intent data, if it requires having good and complete data on their current customers and prospects.
Good question. And we do get a lot of questions around kind of data completeness and data management. My advice typically is that, and we could go a lot of different directions with this, but if we think, for example, about CRM data and getting that kind of foundational data up and running, just, account name and maybe their domain and what industry they are and what size company they are, that sort of relevant information, that's going to be an ongoing initiative that kind of never ends. And so to be able to, yes, you want to be working to clean that data, to maintain that data, but don't set aside the rest of your strategy, including the sort of ability to leverage intent while you're waiting for that to get cleaned up. Because part of the beauty of intent is that you can, because it's behavioral, you don't necessarily need to tie that intent behavior back to your CRM system in the first go, right? That's the ideal situation is you've got intent data and you're using that in order to get your message in front of that particular, at this point, let's pretend anonymous cookie, right? So you don't have personally identifiable information, but to be able to then, push that information back into your systems as additional layers of information, you don't have to have it all scrubbed and clean and perfect in order to get that first step in, to get your brand in front of them.
Okay, perfect. Question from Crystal in terms of measurement. She said she's trying to go deeper than basic analytics and is asking if she should be tracking all advertisements kind of the same way, whether it be Google or LinkedIn, or what recommendations do you have in looking at different types of advertising? Different channels. Yeah,
and that's a tricky one. I think in general when it comes to measurement, that different channels and different programs and different initiatives may indeed require a few different ways of kind of thinking about measurement. That being said, I think it is important to be able at the end of the day to understand that if my goal, right, is to enable, both the ability to have the scale to reach the right number of my target accounts and the accuracy, right? I want to accurately be able to reach them and precisely be able to reach them and do that efficiently for the right cost, that you are thinking across all of your different channels with the same kind of a lens that way. Because if you've got one goal for one campaign and a very different goal for a campaign run with a different provider, you're not going to be able at the end of the day to help make decisions about how you should be investing across those two different vendors. And so do keep in mind, right, that sort of scale and precision and efficiency as your sort of driving forces for evaluating all of those options.
Okay, great. Question from Laura. You had touched on sort of the role and significance of being able to determine if accounts are spending time on your website. She's asking if that should be some of the goal of advertising, is just simply driving them to your website, or are you recommending sort of different paths in what you're trying to drive them to from ads?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think one of the most important fundamental things to think about when it comes to advertising is getting away from the idea that the ad itself is going to drive the click to the site. That there's no pretty path like that. The ad is designed to generate that awareness and that interest, but often what we'll see is a correlation between exposure to the ad and then organic traffic from that account on your site, right? So getting increased engagement on your site, regardless of what actual channel they came in through. And so I think that engagement on the site is a much more powerful piece of information than assuming that the channel that's marked as where it came from is actually how they initially found out about you, right? And you can get all sorts of wrapped up in all sorts of fun things about whether it came from organic or SEO or SEM or what, or the ad or whatever it is, but really focusing instead on, okay, what information do I have here? What are they doing? How are they engaging on my site? And how do I want to leverage that information in order to support and drive that account through the funnel?
Okay, great. Another question from Jeff around intent data. He's asking if you found, if in some cases it winds up uncovering companies and buyers that they weren't aware they should be targeting.
Yes. In fact, a really, really important part here, and I probably should have mentioned that with the earlier question too about getting data in place, is that one of the biggest benefits and one of the primary use cases that we find for intent data is that you aren't limited anymore to the existing list of accounts that you have. So the idea that you can say, okay, I want to understand who is interested in these specific topics and keywords, right, that are related to my solutions, that are related to the problems that my solution can solve. I want to understand who's looking for those anywhere, right? And I may or may not have them in my marketing automation system. I may not have them in my CRM. In fact, in some ways, I might be likely not to have them there specifically because that type of research is done so early in the buying cycle. So one of the most important elements of layering in intent data is in uncovering that information earlier in the buying cycle than even having it in CRM, right? And that enables me then to importantly take action on that, right? So I mentioned that just because I don't know who that individual is doesn't mean I can't prioritize getting my message in front of them, with advertising, even before they've raised a hand.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to take one more question on it's kind of a strategic one on ABM overall. Sarah said they're earlier days and still kind of refining their ABM approach. She's asking if you think a tiered approach to ABM makes sense, with sort of having a smaller set of really A accounts and then maybe a larger set of B accounts, and then should she be advertising to all of them?
Yeah. So I've actually seen success in both directions. Some marketers will start at the tip top, right? So they'll select a sort of smaller, really high priority list of accounts to start with and then expand as they scale out their ABM strategy. The reverse is also sometimes true, where you'll start with kind of a broader target account list. Here's everyone I want to be going after, and then as I get more sophisticated, I segment out, my priority A and priority B. I would say when it comes to advertising specifically to those different tiers of accounts that Yes, there's benefit in using advertising in both situations. The prioritization is what becomes really critical. So you could imagine a situation where my priority A are those accounts that are showing really strong signs of intent, that are doing all sorts of searching and researching and trending on my keywords, and I want to prioritize those and potentially spend more per account on those. My B group, less so, right? I want to set up my situation where or my system in such a way that I'm sure getting my message in front of them, but only at the right price, right? I'm not willing to go into the really expensive category of spending on those, A, because I've got to stretch my dollars over a larger number of accounts, but B, because I'm fairly certain that they're going to need other ways of supporting them before they're quite ready for the next step in the journey.
Okay, awesome. Nani, these great insights. Really appreciate you addressing all the questions. Quick reminder for artists, we didn't get to all the questions. I'm going to send them to Nani, ask her to follow up with a couple of you directly. Also, there were a couple specific about demand base, so they'll probably be better for Nani to address directly with you. Nani, thanks again. This was outstanding. I really appreciate all of the background and everything you shared.
Thanks again.
All right. Quick reminders, chances to win passes to our B2B Marketing Exchange, so keep an eye out for that. Also, the next session in the series, the Campaign Optimization Series, will be at 2 p.m., so keep an eye out for that. That's going to be on From Interruptive to Irresistible, how video content is leveling up B2B marketing. So keep an eye out for that and all the sessions in the series. We hope you take advantage of them and increase your chances to win. So thanks again to Nani. Thank you all for joining, and have a great day, rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.